Sariet Matkal. Sariet, or yeah, Sariet Matkal. That's it. Okay.
I think his brother was in that as well before him.
Yeah. I think his brother died.
Yes, and Tebby, yes.
Yeah.
I wish I understood why it says it's streaming, but it's not streaming.
Hi.
Hey, Tom.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
Very well.
Yes, he was shamed in moving to the table because the people on
I
the
was-
screen couldn't hear him, so he came
I was
forward.
castigated for.
Rightly so.
You're
Rightly so.
you're the opposite of castigated, or you're the opposite, at least of ostracized, kind of in the way that the when in Parshat Tazria and Mitzvah, it's like if someone's got a skin condition, it's like you're supposed to say tahor tahor, which means impure impure, and then the person's supposed to go far away. But this is the opposite. They're saying, bring Arthur closer, closer.
Yes, it's just we love you. We're not criticizing. We love you so much. We just can't miss a word you say.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Ellen, that's so strange because that's the exact opposite of what you said to me privately.
Well, you're supposed to keep that private.
All right, good to see everybody. We'll do our federally mandated discussion of Israel for about 10 minutes or so, and then 15, and then we'll get to our text. Netanyahu, let me say, it's clearly proving. If you want proof that Netanyahu is both Jewish and old,
Younger than me.
he just had surgery for a hernia. That's the Jewish old man's disease, right? Hernia. All right, fine. Wasn't as funny as I thought. Because I always thought that was what, that's how you prove it. So yeah, Netanyahu had a surgery yesterday.
Instead of your circumcision, you show your
hernia scars. That's right. Netanyahu had hernia surgery yesterday. I think probably the most notable change or thing that's happened in the last week, more so than previous weeks. So again, it's not about what's happening, but rather what's changed. And I think kind of the weekly demonstrations against Netanyahu have resumed. And this time, it's always, well, that's not true. In the past, prior to October 7th, it was centered around the judicial reforms. Although I always believed, and I think I've said it here on a number of occasions, and I will continue to maintain, that I don't think it had as much to do with judicial reforms as it had to do with who is in the government with Netanyahu. But they can't very well, they can protest the government for sure, but they're able to be much more specific with a need than to just say we don't like our government. But they can protest that specific, and so they took on judicial reform. But I really think judicial reform really is just a different way of saying we don't like the government for good reason. The thing about it is, and so now, and for the longest time, the demonstrations stopped. They picked up again about 2 months ago, or 2.5 months ago, not nearly with the same fervor as they were prior to October 7th, because a lot of people, me included, feel that it's, no matter you agree or disagree, you want to stay you don't want to, I don't think we wanted to be communicating such division amongst our own people at such a kind of a crisis time. However, I think that enough time has passed that the Israeli citizens, and me even, but to a lesser extent, but have regained the need to protest. And so there was a pretty significant protest that happened on Saturday night, which is usually the night that the protests are. And the protest is now kind of focuses around something which we also have been talking about here, something I believe, which is, although I admittedly, Arthur and I say that very gratefully, kind of brought me back to a little bit more to the middle from this. But I think we need to be focusing on hostage return and not on destruction. And but I don't want to suggest that what we're doing is wrong or just. I don't think it's wrong. I think it's, as I've said, just war, and it's something we neither started nor desired. I'm not trying to make this out to be. I'm not in the same place that these other. Ceasefire. I'm about hostage return.
Yeah, but, right. Hamas has regressed on that, right? They came close, and now they've reverted back, and basically are saying our original demands stand. Get out of Gaza first, and then we'll begin to release the hostages.
Right, which I don't believe to trust that would be the most naive. I mean, so we can't do that. As much as I want the hostages back, we cannot do that because that is insane. I mean, they can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. But then, like, oh yeah, sure, we're going to trust. We'll leave. We'll just kind of trust you to kind of run this back, and then we just know you'll just lovingly return our hostages to us.
And you don't walk away from a burning building when 80% of the fire has been put out. You don't leave 20% of the fire going on.
Right.
Let's finish the job.
Right. Again, I agree. My problem is that as I've said, I sound like a scratched record, but I'm going to keep saying it. I don't know what finish the job looks like, and I don't think anyone really does.
Surrender.
Well, if that's correct, then we're not 80% of the way there. That's I think we're 20% of the way there, and that's because surrender is do you think Hamas is in they don't seem like the surrendering group.
Well, Bibi says, or he's been quoted as saying, I think this is true, I'm not sure, word for word, I don't know, that the 4 battalions, 2,000 to 4,000 militia left in Rafah are not the strongest units. And as soon, in the next week or two, IDF is going to take the population out of Rafah. I think it'll take more than a couple of weeks. IDF will go in a matter of a few days, Bibi says, thereafter, this thing will be over.
Look, if that, well, I would give me 1/2 second. Let me just respond to that, and then I want to hear you have to say, Tom. If that's true, then I am in favor of it. If that's true, like, because it's like just trusting what all we need is this, and just a couple days later it'll all be over. Like, boy, that sounds way too good to be true. But if that's true, then I'm okay with it. I just don't know. Tom, go ahead.
It seems like Rafah's a safe house, and if you don't go in there, you just go away. They'll all come pouring out, and they might not be quite as formidable as they were 2 months ago, but they're still there intact.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I'm torn, but I still, now I'm just so desperately want to get the hostages back. I feel as if it's just been so long, and we really haven't made any progress in that regard. And it's a sadness. It's a great sadness. There's no question about it. But I hope if he's right, then I'm satisfied with that. And
You can buy me a martini.
yeah, that's exactly right. If he's right, it's like if it really was, in a couple weeks' time, we'll be in Rafah. 3 days later, it'll all be over. That means we're talking about by May 1st.
Yep.
It's all right. If I knew that, I would be okay with that. But I'm struggling to think. I don't know. I just feel as if
there are two questions that nobody can answer. One is, what is the condition of the hostages? We have no idea.
no idea. Right.
And the second is, where are they?
Right, no,
They may not even be in Rafah, they may be somewhere else.
agreed. No
So
idea
you
where
could go
they
in
are.
and take Rafah and still not release your hostages.
That's right.
As long as there's anti-Semitism rife throughout the world, it's never going to be over. I
Right.
mean, that's kind of unrealistic.
That's
but-
true too. It's never going to be over, but
That's-
and I agree. I mean, we don't know that the hostages are in Rafah. I would argue that they're probably not in Rafah. I mean, who knows where they are? Who knows what condition they're in? Who knows where they are? It's I don't know. Like my goal is my personal. What's in the best interest of Israel? And the answer is, I don't know what's in the best interest of Israel. Maybe doing it the way that Netanyahu suggests is in the best interest. And if so, then I'm okay with it. But what about if, like, is Israel becoming more and more of a pariah throughout the world because we are doing what we have to do to defend ourselves? I'm not saying that what we're doing is wrong. I'm just saying that we are indeed becoming more and more of a pariah. And if that's the case, is that in the best interest of Israel? And all I want to know is what's in the best interest of Israel. And I don't know what the answer is to that question. Jim, I know you had a thought.
The question of pariah has to do with image, but the law of war is with regard to sieges, and this is a siege. The law of war is that if the besieged party allows free egress of the civilian population, then any damage that's caused and any deaths becomes the responsibility of those inside
Right.
who refuse to surrender.
Right.
So in that respect, according to the well-established law of war, the morality is on the side of Israel in this situation.
Unfortunately, you're right, but unfortunately, the world doesn't see. I'm 100% in agreement with you. Unfortunately, that's the.
media doesn't
That's the way the
say.
media represents
The
it.
Now,
media
sieges have
doesn't say
always
that
been
way.
very brutal, and sometimes the defenders do not allow people out, which is what Hamas is doing.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, that's what the zealots who
Yes, I was thinking
defended
the same
temple,
thing. Sikari
that-
did with
they
Yochanan ben
refused to-
Zakkai.
They refused to allow people out, and Yochanan ben Zakkai had to pretend to be dead
Right,
in order to
it
be
went out in the
removed.
closet.
In the coffin. No, I can't believe I never made that connection. And until you brought it's like, but it's exactly the same. It's a great, great analogy. So, by the way, for those of you who don't come to the Sages class, you should. It's a great class. But suggested by Arthur. What Jim was referring to was Talmud reference to the story of Yochanan ben Zakkai when he was living within Jerusalem, and the Romans had the city of Jerusalem under siege, but if a person wanted to leave, they couldn't because there were this group called the Sikari or the Zealots of some sort who wouldn't let Jews leave Jerusalem in an attempt to be full solidarity and no one leaving. And so Yochanan ben Zakkai faked his own death as a way of preserving Judaism and establishing Yavna and creating the first yeshiva there. So it's kind of it's a fun analogy and a good analogy. Any other thoughts?
Just a quick thought. It's been almost 6 months. It's 179 days today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was 176 announced by Central Synagogue on Friday night. So it's almost 6 full months
Wow. Thank
that
you.
the hostages have been
Thank you.
there.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi,
How
Paul.
are you?
I'm okay. Gotta get out of range. My voice is so powerful.
And you have to sit in the hallway.
My voice is so powerful.
It's your Beamer voice.
I did not
think so.
realize. I accept
It's a
my
good thing.
power voice. All right, so
Scooch.
nice to see you all on screen, by the way, everyone who's here.
Sorry.
By the way, just in case you're wondering, those of you who are on screen, I'm going to walk over here so you can see what I'm talking about. We have we see you because you're on the TV screen right here. That TV screen that you can see up there, we're looking at all of you. So just want you to know that it's not just me looking at you on the screen, but everybody here in the class is. All right, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Adonai, our God, commanding
Amen.
us to busy ourselves in the words of Torah. Thank you. Okay. So we left off at we finished verse 12. That's chapter 3, verse 12.
We were on 10, okay. Must have been daydreaming.
And because we talked about how Moses, asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And we talked about how it's not just it's not just humility, but rather it's legitimately, by the way, 117 if you're wondering what page. It's not just humility that caused, which is the reason why Moses would say such a thing, but literally page 117 on the text, chapter 3. We're going to start officially with verse 13, but I'm just kind of going back to verse 11 for a moment, and say that it's also Moses saying that he legitimately doesn't see himself as a Hebrew. I mean, he knows he's a Hebrew, but he doesn't, he's grown up as an Egyptian. And so he's also, I think, saying it's like, of all people to lead this group, it's kind of strange that you would ask a person who is not really of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and God says, I'll be with you. That'll be your sign. And when you have freed the people, you shall worship God at this mountain. And that mountain being, of course, Sinai. Okay, so.
Well, maybe he asked him because he was an Egyptian and he was known to Pharaoh and he knows the way of the Egyptians and could relate to him more.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe who asked him? God?
God says you know that
God
you're
chose
particularly
him.
capable. It reminds me to go back to the references back to our sages class, which is why did they pick Gamliel as the Nasi, and then when Gamliel was kicked out, why did they put Elazar ben Azariah? It's like, you have a good way with the leadership of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, you're a value to us for that reason.
Still, I think it's unlikely that God would choose a non-Jew to help the Jews.
I agree with you. It seems very unusual. Well, he knows that he's a Jew or a Hebrew. or Israel. He's just, I think from Moses's perspective.
Yes.
He isn't, right? It's like from Moses' perspective.
Well, but also from the people who talked about him, when he first goes to the well and helps the women,
He's an
they
Egyptian.
refer to him as an Egyptian.
Right.
So he's perceived as Egyptian.
Now, I'm rereading this book. So I've started yesterday. First 63 pages. Richard Friedman's The Exodus. And
I've got the book and I'm using it for my course.
it's a great book. It's a fascinating book. And Friedman's just really a great intellect, and just really great stuff. And one of the things that he feels very strongly about is how the origins of Judaism kind of came from Midian. And so, and he believes that kind of this time that Moses was, now I'm kind of expanding what he said, but this time that Moses was with, here with Jethro and with Zipporah, that this was the time in which, that Judaism was emerged in that time, or our people emerged with monotheism, and our people emerged at that time. This is another thought, and that, or at least the way that Judaism is kind of uses monotheism, and so he believes that the origins of this come from Midian, and so there, if that's the case, then it just kind of makes this moment a very kind of profound moment. That God chooses Moses at this moment. It's almost like God creating the Israelite, Hebrew, Jewish people at this moment, perhaps.
And I don't know how to raise my hand. So I have a question. What exactly is the sign?
Oh yeah, we talked about that
Yeah.
last week. When I said, he said, I'll be with you, that shall be your sign. Right? And I think we talked last week about how maybe it's the bush, which is the sign, or maybe it's, that the fact is that people will recognize when Moses is kind of, is marching forward, that there's something that God is kind of with them. Maybe there's some sort of aura around them. I don't know, but it's not clear what that is when it says that shall be the sign. So now we get to 13, verse 13, which is new material. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Anybody have any thoughts? Paul's got a grin on his face. What do you think, Paul?
Well, I'm waiting for this moment because the result of the answer is seen on the bema. If you're sitting in the sanctuary and look to the right, you'll see it. You'll see the name in Hebrew.
Yep.
I am that I am. I will be what I will be.
Correct. So what Paul's referring to is on the artwork in the sanctuary.
I wondered what that said.
What's that?
I wondered what that said.
That's
What
God's
that
name.
meant. Okay.
Now the question is, what does it mean? First of all, let's start. So it says, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father has sent me to you. So again, if you note that it seems as if there is a disconnect between Genesis, the book of Genesis, and this. Now it either could be, because if you remember when God speaks to Moses, God says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Mm-hmm. And we understood that to be Moses not really knowing those historical figures, and therefore God needs to introduce God's self to Moses, not in terms of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because that has no meaning to Moses, but rather as I'm the God of your father. So that might make Moses feel more connected. Now, that might be the case for Moses, but is that necessarily the case for all of the Israelites or Hebrews who are currently slaves in Egypt? The answer, of course, is, well, who knows? But I think that a people have, if you are enslaved as a people, then that must mean you share some sort of commonality with the other people who are enslaved. You can't, like, if there's a whole group of people who are slaves, is it just random? No, you have to say, why is it that we are all slaves? And, we the ones who happen to have come from, from Goshen before or whatever. And then, and the lore of, the history, well, it's because there was an Abraham and Isaac. So my point being is that the fact that God isn't saying to Moses, go and tell them that I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the ones that you've always talked about around the campfire at night, whenever, that's who I am. Instead, Moses is supposed to go and say, the God of your fathers has come. It's just kind of an interesting that he would do that to Moses, I accept. But that would be the message for the Israelites, a little bit more hard to accept.
Genesis is a legend. The people who lived those long, long ago saw all these things, the sun, the moon, and the things growing and so on, and they needed somebody to tell them, what's all this doing here? And therefore I say the Genesis is a legend, whereas Exodus is real history. It has historicity. It really happened. We have evidence for it, and that's the distinction.
So then why did they put Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the first part when God introduced himself to Moses?
In Exodus.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a reminder. It's a reminder.
Why didn't they use a reminder here?
Yes.
All right. So fair enough. Now I guess what I'm trying to say is that, look, historicity aside, I'm just going by narrative. It just kind of does. I'm curious as to why he wouldn't like that. The first introduction to the Israelites as slaves wouldn't have been as some sort of a unifying thing, as opposed to just kind of like this is who your father worshipped. Just to me, like, again, it worked perfectly fine when God introduced himself to Moses, but not just less so here. But let's continue. Oh, you got you.
There's that little letter C right next to where it says the Lord.
We haven't gotten there yet.
And down below
Wait,
it says,
hold on. Where are you reading this?
It's a little farther than
show
we've
you-
gotten.
Oh, okay, fine.
oh, am I
Yeah.
too far? I
Yeah.
apologize.
No problem.
Okay. Anyway, so thus shall you speak to the Israelites, the Lord. And down below it says, that's where the name YHWH. So it's called the Lord, and so in Hebrew it's Adonai,
Right.
because Jews refuse to pronounce the name of that
Right.
of that God.
Correct.
So that's what he says, that's the God.
Right.
And in parts of the Bible, in the earlier, God is called Elohim or El.
Right.
So,
Which is in plural.
yes.
So, okay, so it says, Moses is like, so they're going to ask me, what's your name? What shall I say to them? Now, interestingly, we know God as named Yahweh, Yud-He Vav-He, but here, as as it's pointing out, that we don't get introduced to God that way. Or Moses doesn't get introduced to God that way.
Well, I think the reason Moses asks, what is your name,
Mhm.
is because in those days there were lots of gods. And so therefore, he needed to know the name.
Yep, I agree. Now, but I think I would argue, I would ask, is Moses, it's almost like this is Moses's need more than he's blaming it on they're all going to ask me what your name is. I'd be fine not needing to know your name, but I'm sure they're all going to ask me. So can you just give me your name so I can repeat it? Like, this seems to me like because as far as the Israelites or Hebrews are concerned, I'm sure that if they just start marching out of Egypt, that they're fine not knowing God's name. But Moses is the one. I think
But I think, I beg your pardon, Rabbi, but I think you're trivializing the issue here.
Okay. You're saying that that they need to know a name so they can specifically worship that specific God.
Yes.
Now, I would ask, is it not from their perspective, their God already? Don't they know there's a God of their people?
They're monotheists.
But Adonai,
We don't know if they're monotheists or not, but
He's one of their gods.
right. But
Okay.
I know we don't know, but I'm just kind of, to me, I agree that it's good you need to know the name, but I feel here like it's more of Moses needing to know than really reflecting what the people's need is. But maybe I am trivializing it, guys.
Well, here is this documentary hypothesis has between the Elohist and the Yahwist. And so Adonai Eloheinu, so maybe God went under two names, but that Eloheinu, El, that's what the Muslims call Allah. That's their name. They don't use the other name.
Right.
for God.
But
Then again, and Akhenaten for his monotheistic single God was Aten, and Aten is Adonai.
But God's names are names that we ascribe to God. God has no name.
Yahweh.
Well,
God has no name.
Well, I guess you're
because
right, that's
a
not-
name, we call him Hashem, which means the name.
he just
But-
said
No.
this is his
Hashem
name.
is not. Wait 1/2 second. Hashem is not. Hashem is simply a name that we've constructed so we don't say God's name.
So, but the point is that to apply a name to somebody or something suggests a human quality. And God is spiritual energy. God is not human. And therefore, a name does not apply.
Yeah.
Because when you name somebody like your child, you take command. You name the child. So by naming the child, you are taking command of the child.
That is us. The people of the time looked at their gods as having very personal qualities, like Poseidon, the god of the sea. They had an anthropomorphism.
Therein lies the difference, right?
Yes.
God, our God, the Hebrew God, is saying, I'm not your run-of-the-mill God. I am not a garden variety God. I am unique.
True, but I think to Jim's point, and that's how we, in a more sophisticated, modern, but that's my monodean, and I fully agree with it. But I'm just saying that it's my monodean. I wonder to what degree that the authors of the Bible and the people living in the biblical period, did they also have that type of kind of sophisticated understanding of God, or did they have a much more personal? And the answer, of course, is it was personal because they were idol worshippers, and we were trying to kick out, even the Jew. Amongst our own people, we were idol worshippers until we kind of rooted it out. So therefore, our need was to personalize God, even if. But I agree with Arthur's the way that's kind of where we are today,
Yes.
with 100% certainty. But the question is, what about 4,000 years ago?
Yes.
And I think that they weren't as sophisticated.
Well, maybe by the time of Jeremiah they were sophisticated, but
Maybe,
yeah.
right? Again, as I say, they're still worshiping idols until, well, maybe you're right, Jeremiah on the time. But so what's the okay? Go ahead.
Well, I was just to the point of the anthropomorphic nature of the gods that I don't know much about other religions of the time, but with Greek religion, it was very common to talk about intimate relations between gods and humans, and not at all uncommon to have them hanging out at your house or whatever.
It's in the Bible too, by the way.
Well, yeah, but
remember we read these Nephilim kind of godlike. They gave birth to children in the Torah portion of Noah, I think it was.
And they had sex with humans.
Yeah.
But you also do have, though, the one fairly significant difference is the whole thing about Moses. I can't look at God or I'll die.
Right.
This is different.
Right.
This is not like your
this
garden
is
variety.
correct.
So it's probably one of those evolving things where there are flashes of this more modern conception, or as we want to term it, maybe
Yeah,
not
it's a good point.
entirely modern, but definitely different than.
So yeah, I agree. So let's take a look at so verse 14 says, and God said to Moses, so this is in response to Moses asking what your name is. And God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. he continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. So it's not lost to me is the fact that God has given both a name and a nickname in the same. It's like you could say that Andrew sent you. Andrew's my name, and tell him Andy sent you. So let's start with Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So it has been translated in the past as I am that I am.
Which sounds like Popeye.
Right. But
Also, I will be what I will be.
Paul is correct. But it's I will be what I will be, because Ehyeh is a future tense. I will be. Asher, that. Ehyeh, I will be. I will be that which I will be. Now, what so excuse me. So what's I think this is really important. That that you understand it to be translated, I will be that which I will be. Because now, to Arthur's point, so much of people's at the time's understanding of God was limited to what they knew and to their past experiences. But this is speaking about God in the future. I will be what I will be. In other words, you don't have a full understanding or appreciation of who or what I am. Everything that you know is limited to the past. I am the future. I am unlimited and unknown in that regard. I think it's and I think part of the easy translation of I am what that I am has always been to kind of help us or help people make sense of God in that regard. But I'm so sorry. But the fact is that it's like Aristotle, right? Talks about and really one of the most worthy and time standing. In other words, it passes the test of time perfectly fine. Aristotle's always talked about God as the first mover. You understand that notion of the primary first mover? Everything is set into motion by something else. And so therefore, what set the first thing in motion in Aristotle's claim? God, right?
But today we know much more.
Okay, but still is a very worthy theory. But my point is that, and I think it's like almost saying, and I know that the Bible was certainly not written in response to Aristotle, because I know which was written first. However, it's almost like it's almost as if it's saying to Aristotle, God's not just the first mover, but it's the future mover too. And and so I think that the name that is given, I will be that which I will be, is a very kind of revealing name to me. Yeah.
Well, I think it kind of goes to the idea that God is everywhere, but nowhere in particular. And according to the rabbis, they would argue that God wants a personal relationship with each and every one of us. Each of us is completely unique, never to be replicated again in the world, never having been replicated from the past. And God wants a personal relationship with each and every one of us. So therefore, God may be manifesting himself differently to each and every person.
Very possible. Although I would say that they say that God is nowhere in particular, although we do have, the Torah tells us that God's place is the Mishkan, resting place is the Mishkan. So clearly God does have places, but I do understand.
His presence.
Right.
But identical twins. It's not only identical twins, but I know someone.
Identical twins, not identical.
A mother, the daughter
Right, 'cause they've got different
very
personalities.
much like the mother.
Yeah. Right. Physical
but they're
features.
not carbon copies of each other. Identical
Literally
twins.
true, yes.
Okay.
Could I say something?
Yes.
It's important to point out that Hebrew does not have to be, it doesn't have a present tense for the verb to be.
It doesn't?
No.
Let's see. right there. You're right. Wait, no. Hove is
But there is a present tense and a future tense with or without.
it just
the
doesn't
to be.
need the doesn't need the word doesn't need the verb to be. That's correct.
It's like Chinese that way. Chinese, there's no real verb for the verb to be.
Right,
No
but
word for it.
right, but they do have past I was and I will be. They do have expressions. Yes. Okay, so and then it goes on to say, tell him that Ahias sent me to you. Right? It's very. I just love that. It's like again the nickname that's like. You don't have to remember the whole Ahias or Ahia. Just give him my nickname. Anyway.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
the Egyptians had their gods were very specific. They only had one task. They were the god of fertility, the god of war, the god of this or that. But they all had their own separate activities that they were responsible for. So now you're telling Moses to say that there's one overarching God that did not exist in Egyptian mythology or in Egyptian society as to which God it was. What do you want to have happen, and that's the God that you go to.
Well, no,
And now Moses is supposed to say, "I'm the overarching."
I agree and disagree with you at the same time. The reason why I say that is because, because you're right that Egyptian culture and society had many gods. That was calling card of Egyptian society, including the pharaoh was a god. That said, just prior, one or two pharaohs prior was that monotheistic pharaoh, so they do have some context for monotheism within Egypt. That said, the Israelites presumably, if we take the text of the Torah to be unified, and therefore if Genesis is part of this story and this narrative, then the Israelites should have at least some context for monotheism. And since that they are, but the other piece is that the Israelites are the audience for Moses. And it's Pharaoh isn't necessarily Moses's audience. The Israelites are Moses's audience. And so therefore they're the ones. Moses doesn't need to convince Pharaoh of the one God versus multiple gods. Moses just needs to convince the Israelites of that, if that makes sense. But I do agree that it is a departure from what's known in Egyptian culture. That's for sure. That's for sure. And I think I think that part of the reason why Akhenaten was kicked out as Pharaoh with his monotheism was just because I think that they didn't like it. I think that they felt more comfortable knowing that there were multiple gods for various different things, and that they didn't have to just, because for that matter, if you pray to the god of if you pray to the sun god because you want to have a nice sunny day out, and it rains that day, then you can just say, "Oh, the sun god's mad at me," but that doesn't mean the god of fertility is mad at me. You know what I mean? And so it's like I think that it's helpful to know that there are various gods, so you don't have to feel like what if one time you don't get what you would have prayed for, or you sacrificed for, that it's it's an all or nothing type of a thing. And I suspect that they probably liked having multiple gods. It probably made things a lot easier for them.
Next week, the sun god will be eaten up by something, which ancients would have had to interpret some way.
Yep, they would have. And they would have said it's an omen. They would have said that, I can only imagine to what degree these types of natural events, just how deeply it shook primitive people to their core, right? You take a solar eclipse. Dear Lord, that must have been terrifying to the people.
Yes.
Terrifying.
In fact, there's a science fiction story where there were two suns, and it was always daylight, and the whole civilization developed under these conditions. After 100 years, there was an alignment of the suns, so that complete darkness resulted on the earth. and the people went out of their minds.
Yep.
The civilization collapsed.
Right, because it clearly means that a greater power is changing things, and not discussing it. So therefore, I can't imagine what an eclipse did to the Egyptian world.
It is kind of interesting, not a perfect analogy though, that in the Jewish Bible, we have angels, right? So the Lord is the Lord of hosts. The hosts are the angels. And hosts and angels by definition have a particular task to perform in
That's
the
true.
real world.
That's true.
We don't pray to the angels, but they are part of the Jewish narrative, the
That's true.
biblical narrative.
Yep.
What was the task?
The task varies according to what needs to be done, so that God may send to you a guardian angel if you're giving birth to make sure that the birth goes well, for instance.
Instead of the stork.
And once that function is completed, the angel disappears. That's the belief.
All right. So let's continue. So, so now it says it changes gears and then addresses my concern of before. It says, then you shall, and God said further to Moses, then you shall speak to the Israelites. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. So now it's saying, don't just say the God of your fathers, but bring it into context with the earlier stories.
Right.
This shall be my name forever. This my appellation for all eternity. So verse 16 then starts out with what I think is a very wise approach. Good strategy, Moses. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have taken note of you and of what is being done to you in Egypt. Let's just finish the next verse. And I have declared, I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now,
Can I ask a question about, we went real quickly, this shall be my name forever, this is my appellation for all eternity.
Yeah.
Why don't we use that? If it's for all eternity, yeah.
Well, because
he's declared it pretty early here.
I know, and so why?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'd never heard of it, but there's a lot I haven't heard about. But it's not one we use.
I can't answer why we have chosen to use different names as other names.
Because this is pretty specific.
Right. It's like the person says, this is my name, and I'm going to call you something else instead.
Where does it change?
Well, the Muslims.
We never use, it's 1/2 second, we never use this name ever again. It's right here and no other place. So my guess is, and I say this with hesitation, is that maybe we're talking about and I probably should consult Friedman on this, but maybe we're talking about it's almost an unnecessary little part, the introduction of this name. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was added by a redactor or because we don't use the name ever again. It's not like from time to time we go and we reference God this way. It's never used again.
Which way?
Ahia, Asher, Ahia. It's always from, Elohim, Adonai, yeah.
The Muslims charge that Judaism is not monotheistic because it has more than one name for their God.
Really? Do they really claim that about us?
The Muslims, yes, the Muslims insist on their monotheism and charge that Judaism has more than one God.
That's new to me. I'm not saying, because I'm not doubting that the various different names, but I've never heard, in fact, just the opposite. I've heard that Muslims acknowledge that Jews are the monotheistic faith. The one that they struggle with is Christianity because of the Trinity.
That's right.
And they say that, I think the Quran says, you who say 3 is 1 and 1 is 3, you do not know that God is one. And but they don't make that claim about Judaism.
In fact, there's a book by Karen Armstrong called 99 Names of God. So God, one of them is the Merciful, Al-Rahman, and others. So
You're talking about
Islam.
Wow.
Islam.
But they do.
So in just the same way that they have various different names of God as we do.
Different names for the same
God. Yeah, it's for
But
Allah.
they do charge Christianity with trying to make Jesus as God.
Right.
I say that's wrong.
Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit. It's all three that they. So in any event, let's continue. But so not continue. Let's discuss. So what's interesting or worthy about this is, if you notice, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them. So don't take this message to the general population. This is a huge thing we're doing here. You got to start small. Don't just get up on a and start on a soapbox and start orating from the middle of the stand on the foot of the Sphinx and say and say all Israelites gather. I got something important to tell you. Rather, it's let's start with just the leaders who can handle this type of information and see what they think.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's also more practical. If you're going to Pharaoh, you want to say, and my whole team here
Right,
agrees
me and
with
my team, right? Or they agree with me.
Yeah.
And again, we talked about this last week, but I do think we should just keep this in mind. I like to think about it, is that Moses is a wanted man. Going back to Canaan is dangerous.
He's got to have his posse with him.
Yeah. The wanted man. Where last we left was Pharaoh was pursuing him to kill him. Yeah.
He must have a tremendous magnetism about him too, because he says, "I'm here to lead you to the land of milk and honey." And are people going to ask me what God's name is? I would think it's
Who are you?
Who are you?
But although,
but it's he knows him because he's full of God's.
yeah. Although I struggle to understand how much time has passed. Like, I think it's 7 years, but I don't know. And if it is,
7 years since he's left Egypt.
yeah, but I don't know that. I can't remember why I think that. But the reason why I say this is because, like, will they remember him? He was clearly a relatively known character, not just in the Egyptian court, but I'm sure, like, all the slaves kind of knew the big players up there. So maybe.
I mean, if I came in here one day and said, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you,"
right?
You would not. Your first question would not be, "What's the name?"
No, I would get the police officer out of here to kind of to protect us. No, it's you're right. The question is, right, who is he and who is God? They're both unknowns, and so you got to start small. But just remember that there is that we do know that this land that we are going to has
Milk and honey.
and also Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites.
Yeah.
But it does have some nice milk and honey too. God, I presume, they will listen to you. That is to say, the elders.
That's an important point. That's exactly what Tom said. If he just walks in,
right.
Why will they listen to him? Who is he that they would be listening to him? What are his credentials that put him, this Egyptian, now Hebrew, who's married to a Hebrew or whatever, an Israelite,
right.
Midianite, comes and says, "Hey, I heard from
Never just his nickname.
and he tells me that he's going to guide you home to this wonderful place."
It seems like the explanation that he gives. "I'll be with you. That will be your sign." I mean, you just tell.
Yeah,
right.
So he's glowing with the goodness of the Lord.
Well, the question is this: is that when he
authority
says they will listen to you? Okay, I think
the elders.
Right, the elders will listen to you. Is God saying at that point, you have a very compelling argument, they're for sure going to listen to you. Or, or is it these people are always willing to, they have open minds to these types of things and they can listen to you? Or is it, don't worry, I'll do the Jedi mind trick on them and you'll walk in and be like, listen, and then like, we listening to you, right? Or is he gonna like, just somehow mesmerize them into, listening to them?
They listened to him after the plagues. The Pharaoh listened. And
Yeah, but they're
he got his
talking about,
attention.
But
they're
this is
talking
long
about
before the plagues.
Yeah.
that the elders are going to listen to
Right.
him. And who is he? He's a shepherd at this point.
Right.
It's not important if they listen to him. He's advising them what's going to be taking place.
I think it is important.
But there's no downside for them. They're slaves. So, Moses is providing a hopeful message. He's
That was what I was
putting
gonna
them on
say.
notice.
I disagree. I hear you. Let me tell you why I disagree. I have to assume that they have had these false hopes before. And it's like to have another person kind of come in and be like, okay, everyone get ready. We're about to leave this time. They're like, I get you. We want to believe, but we need a little more than this.
But we don't know that.
You're right.
We know the plain meaning of the text. What may or may not have taken place before that is anybody's guess.
You're right. So you're thinking it's entirely possible that they're just like, my God, there's a person who's coming to redeem us. We're going to listen
believe it or
immediately?
not. They can believe it or not. And for a long time after they were freed, they were saying, we want to go back to Egypt. We're going to starve to
Right.
death. We have no water.
Right.
So they still needed to be convinced at that point. So,
Right. Everyone needed to be convinced, so therefore it wasn't oh my God, a savior has come. Everyone's just like so excited about it. I think there's a lot of hesitation.
I think they're probably saying if the savior comes, he comes. If he doesn't come, it's status quo ante.
Maybe you're right.
Well, I was going to say, this is only slightly off topic. When I was doing my dissertation research, I had the extreme good fortune to be able to interview one of the civil rights leaders, Bob Moses. Interestingly, last name Moses. But he was a very, very quiet person, but one of those quiet people that everyone listens to. And people put their lives on the line repeatedly with this guy. And I was real curious as to how that happens, Well, I tell you, 30 minutes into my interview with him, I thought, if this man says, well, it's about time for us to start walking to Utah, I'd say, okay, let me hit the water fountain and I'll go with you. Some people have that presence.
Right.
They have that goodness and belief in what they're doing. And he wasn't a person pushing anybody. He was just sort of saying, well, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
And here's why.
Yeah.
And it may be that's a similar kind of trait that's why Moses.
So they will listen to you. Then you shall go with the elders of Israel to the king of Egypt. And you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Now, therefore, let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. There's a lot here I want to talk about. But before I start, anybody have any thoughts about this? Well, let's start with.
I'm sorry, I did. Okay, I think there's a misunderstanding about the word this. This shall be my name forever. If you read the Hebrew on this whole paragraph, they introduce Yahweh and they keep on using Yahweh. They never use Ehyeh again.
Right. Right. We don't use Ehyeh ever again. And I think maybe what the note is suggesting is that Ehyeh kind of became Yahweh. But we used Yahweh prior to this. This isn't the first use of Yahweh, but you're right.
And only the high priest could pronounce it later.
Right. That's for sure. But I want to go to the Lord. So they will listen to you. Then you go to with the elders to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Why do I point this out? Because it does communicate here, just to make sure that God has picked us, not we picked God. Are you following what I'm saying? God manifested himself to us. God has come and said, you are my people. And again, what does that change or do? Nothing. I'm just wanted to communicate that there is there's always, the question is, what came first, the people or the God? Did we create God or did God create us? And at least the Torah is trying to communicate here that, that the people may have been around, but at the same time, God manifested God's self to us, picked us.
It's also less threatening to the Pharaoh to say, not, hey, we've decided we want to go do something, but
right.
hey, God is
what are we
calling
say,
on
no
us.
to God? Right. Exactly.
Moses is directing the elders to say that to the king of Egypt.
That's true. So they don't, right.
So I think that here the elders recognize Moses. They know who he used to be. And I think that's why he's able to convince them,
right,
that
that this is legit, or that he is worthy, or that there is something about him which is special.
I think so.
The phrase says, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has manifested himself to us. That he says to the Pharaoh, because the Pharaoh does not know this God. He knows Amun-Ra, for example.
Right.
So that's why that name is significant in saying, this is the God of the Hebrews, who's manifested himself to us. A different God than Pharaoh knew.
That's true. And now also, let's go to the end of this verse, which is, I think, also really important. Let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. Right? So the purpose of this, the purpose of Moses going to Egypt, at least ostensibly at this moment, is not to free or redeem the Israelites, but rather to have them worship God. Now, this I think is important to me, because I think it goes back to the elements that I've been kind of talking about now for a long time, which is that if Moses historically was a priest of Aten, a monotheistic priest for Akhenaten, then, and there's a new pharaoh that, or maybe now two pharaohs into it, that are back to be restored polytheism, as it is typical in Egypt. And if my belief is correct, which I am saying that the Levites were the ones who left Egypt and who were monotheists, and who then it kind of adds up that the first step would be, hey, I just want to go back to these monotheists that are still living in Egypt and let them do their monotheistic worship. Can you please let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness, and so we can have our own little religious ceremonies which center around monotheism.
But it was a challenge to the Pharaoh.
Yes, but as Jim points out, but it's not, it may have been a challenge for sure, but at least it's not, we're not worshiping any of the gods of Egypt. We're not worshiping a rival Egyptian god. We're worshiping a completely separate God. But I agree, it is still a challenge, no question.
I had a comment. Is this the first time God chooses the Israelites?
Yes.
Okay, so Christianity is going to have a problem with this later on. And
why?
Okay, so in another class that I was with, a Jewish person, Cole Show, I forget in Annapolis, Cole something. She said, a friend of hers said, you think God chose you, in that kind of tone. And then Christianity says, we're the new Israel. Because they don't like that idea that God chose Israel.
Strange. I never thought that Christians had a problem with, the chosen one, the chosen people, because I know that that there is a recognition of that it's that they don't have a problem with Judaism, but except that it's incomplete and needs to be completed by further texts and further wisdom and interpretations of that wisdom, which was that of Jesus and the various apostles afterwards. So it's kind of new to. I'm surprised that this person would have said such a thing, and that because it doesn't seem to be consistent with kind of what I understand. But I don't deny that they said it. I'm just saying that I'm just surprised by it.
Okay, let me just say one more thing. The Jewish woman felt embarrassed that our text says God chose us. But in a world where everybody had their own God,
Yeah,
it makes sense that the Egyptian God would choose the Egyptians.
That's true, but considering the fact that Jesus was born and died a Jew, I think that that's probably it's probably useful for Christianity to make sure that to continue to uphold the notion that Jesus was indeed a chosen one also.
But it was also said that how odd of God to choose the Jews.
But it's not true, though. God didn't choose the Jews. The Jews chose God. So we know at Sinai, this is according to the Orthodox tradition, that all 70 nations of the world were offered the Torah and the Ten Commandments. And it was only the Jewish people who opted to accept it.
Yep.
And to follow it.
Midrash. Yeah.
So,
famous Midrash.
Yeah.
God says, here's the Torah, will you accept it? One group, what's in it? God said, it says that you shall not murder. And then this people said, all right, well, we can't do that. So therefore, and then next group went to then they said, what's in it? They said, you can't eat shellfish. Oh, well, no. And then finally, came to the Jews, and the Jews said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will listen and we will do. And
we will do
and we will listen, excuse me. And then, and that's how, so no, that's a famous Midrash, and I agree. But the text starts by saying that God chose us, but the Jewish midrashic tradition contends that yes, God chose us, but then we partnered and chose God back. And we're the only ones. God chose us because God knew that we would be prepared to take on the challenges and the joys that are part of the Torah.
And to be an example to the rest of the world.
That's
to be a light.
A light to the nations. Yeah. Yep. Jim.
I think that Christians do accept that God chose the Jews, but then they believe that by the Jews rejecting Jesus, there is a new covenant, and there are churches called the New Covenant.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
So that the Jews have forfeited their chosenness.
Right,
but not that they were never chosen.
You're right, but even that I don't believe to be a universally Christian. I think that might be a specific denomination of Christianity. But I don't think that the chosenness, I think that that's been, I feel as if that's never, at least in all of my years and experiences, I don't think that that's ever been a hang up amongst the people that I interact with, theologians I interact with. It's not about, okay, yeah, God chose you. But that meant, by the way, by definition, chose us, because Christianity is an outcropping of Judaism. Yes. God chose us too, and we have modernized that which is the chosen, really, the difference between Christianity and Judaism is that, we felt that we needed to we needed to take the Bible and take it into a different direction, as did Christianity believe they should take the Bible into a different direction. Now, the Christianity worked off of an individual and the stories about that individual, whereas Judaism, walked in a different direction, which was let's take that original Torah and just discuss it and create a whole legal guidebook for it. And that's where one goes one direction and one goes another direction. And both now are able to maintain chosenness throughout this. But go ahead.
The origin of anti-Semitism is right there in the book of Matthew because the Jews rejected Jesus. And the Christian belief is that the Messiah will come only when the Jews convert. And so the Jews are responsible for keeping the Messiah from coming.
The second time.
Right. What you're saying, I'm not. I just don't know what you're saying. I'm not saying I don't want. I'm not arguing. I just don't know if that's a fair or.
Well, it's shown in the book of Matthew. It's very clearly shown in the book of Matthew, and I've mentioned this before.
All right, Mary. Good. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But make sure you're unmuted.
Well, I think I'm the only Christian here. I'm not sure about that class, but the reason why I am here is that I grew up as a Methodist, and it was not until I studied theology at Duke when I was 21 or whatever that I realized that Jesus was Jewish. I never knew that, if you can believe that. I never knew it. So the reason why I'm in this class is to learn about the Torah, and I love it. I love everything that's said, and I think Rabbi is correct. I used to, I was thinking all the time in Sunday school, well, why is that the Jews were chosen and we weren't? What about us, But then when I've been studying ever since then, theology, both with the Christians and now with you all. This is my third year, I think. So I really now understand. None of the people I believe that I'm around as a Christian believe that the Jews. We think that God chose the Jews, and then we have to have more revelation. We have to have more things happening, and Jesus came, and then we have all those writings and the apostles and all that stuff. That he was an outcropping of God, and he is God to us, the same. The Trinity is like a community. We feel that it is a community for us to learn more about God. So I think all that you all are saying, these people who say that, they're anti-Semitic, is what it is. And I grew up in an anti-Semitic Durham, North Carolina. I mean, they couldn't believe that I would go to New York and sit on the bus. Those people might be Jewish beside you. And I thought, what? Well, I mean, I don't care what they are. So anyhow, somehow I just wanted to say that it's wonderful to be here with you all. And I didn't say much because I don't know enough about what you all believe. So I'm learning.
And I want to add something to that. Mary is a testimonial why you should not stop this in 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Stop what in 2 years?
You have said that you were going to stop these classes.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't say
Yes.
that. If I did, I was a mistake. I said, but I did say we're stopping at Exodus 20 again, though.
Please don't stop these classes.
Yeah. We're going to go on and get back to, we'll do Joshua and Judges again, and Samuel, which is fascinating. I love that stuff. It's actually, I mean, they're both good, but that's just more of a story. In any event, thank you. Let's continue with this. We have a few more minutes, but let's just finish this. Maybe we can finish the paragraph, I'm not sure. Yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with various wonders, which I will work upon them. After that, he shall let you go. So what's to me, very interesting here is this. I think I've even said this before here, which is that that in the Arab world, military strategists will say that the Arabs, like a group like Hamas, responds to might and doesn't, and again, whether or not I'm not judging it as a right or wrong, but that is kind of how the Arab world has consistently responded when there are, in terms of Saddam Hussein, like how is it that Arab countries are relatively calm? It's when you have an exceedingly strong leader or despot almost. And so, and what this is saying is that, the king of Egypt will only let you go if you prove that you have you're mightier than he. And I will dispose the Egyptians favorably towards this people, so that when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. Boy, if this doesn't seem like a justification for us stealing from the Egyptians on our way out, I don't know what is. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold and clothing, and you shall put these on your sons and daughters, thus stripping the Egyptians. That's all part of what happens at the end, right as we're leaving, is that we went out, we left Egypt with saying and taking all the stuff with us. Now, notice, by the way, that it says each woman shall borrow from her neighbor, not each person. Now, is that just because the men are busy? The women are at the house, and so therefore they can go to their neighbors' houses and borrow the stuff? Or is it because women are particularly skilled at borrowing stuff from their neighbors? Or is it because the people who built the golden calf with all this stuff were the men, not the women? And so therefore we're trying to make sure that everyone's guilty in the golden calf episode. Like by the way, I don't know the answer to this. I'm struggling. Greg Walker typically is on his iPad looking at Rashi to say, why is it that Greg hustled over to get his phone or his iPad out there to tell us what Rashi is saying. I don't know, but I'm not exactly sure why it's just women and not.
But why the word borrow?
That's the translation. We know that it wasn't. It says ask. Each woman will ask from her neighbor. But we've always known that was taken.
Going back to that first section, that the king, yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. I would say all governments are like that.
Yeah, that's probably
the
true.
The U.S. wouldn't give up Alaska.
Right.
Russia wouldn't give up Ukraine.
Yep, no, that's true. That's true.
Different.
All are like that. There's no doubt about it. But yes, you're right. There's not a single geopolitical entity that doesn't respond to greater might.
I've been struck at multiple places in the Torah where good management is being practiced, and this is hey, just giving you a heads up. This is not going to be easy. You're going to have this, problem and this problem, and so you prepare your people for what they're going to be facing.
That's true. It's true. All right, everybody. Thank you so much to you all. And by the way, Sunday at actually, I think it's at St. John's College. The Jewish Film Festival is part of the Jewish Film Morning as a part of the Annapolis Film Festival is happening. It's always really, really good. And the Annapolis Film Festival is a really excellent organization, and they do a great job of having a couple of Jewish films on Sunday mornings. And so I'll be there. I'm actually, as I do normally, participate on a panel to discuss the films, and
But do you know the name of the building where it would be?
No, but I mean they have it. I just don't.
Okay,
This is Francis Scott Key Auditorium, probably, isn't it?
first of all, the very fact that you're uttering Francis Scott Key, it's like, so
Call it
sad.
Key Auditorium.
All right, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.
Thank you.
It's at Mellon Hall.
Mellon Hall, oh, great.
Good, I'm so
I'll write it
glad.
down. There's an-
And, you know, you bring it with you
Okay,
on
thank
Friday
you.
nights and that'll
Yeah,
be
I'll
your
try.
book. Or
See
you
what time.
can
Yeah, I
leave
didn't
it
know